Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to have you here. It's going to be a great afternoon discussion. It's not afternoon, it's evening. It's going to be a great evening discussion. I'm talking to you from Chicago, but people are watching from all over the country and all over the world. We're going to have a great discussion. For those of you here in the United States, happy 4th of July. For those of you in other parts of the world, I wish you all the best, even though it's not a holiday. A lot of great stuff we're going to talk about tonight. A lot of current events, be answering super chats and all of that. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Let's have a great evening chat.
The American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
All right, everybody. So glad to have you here. So for those who may not be familiar with the way we do things here on this show, I give my opening remarks. My opening remarks are then followed by a roll call where I find out who's on the other side of the camera. We call you all out as we see you. Names and locations. And then after that, I answer your super chat questions for the rest of the night. So if there's something you'd like me to talk about in the second half of our program tonight, just send me a super chat and Don D from NYC will be taking them down. And then I will be answering those super chat questions in the second half of the show. So that's how it works. If you want to tweet this out, put it in a Facebook group, put it on your Instagram, invite all your friends, drop it in a Telegram chat list, bring everyone. Let's have a great, lively discussion on this holiday here in the United States. Plenty to talk about. Welcome, everybody. So glad to be with you here tonight. Got plenty of unnamed water beverage. And it's going to be a great show. Well, listen, I am in Chicago, and today we were in the park in downtown Chicago, near that big silvery thing that they have here in Chicago. They call the Bean. And we did some great outreach, great team of people. We were out in the street today, got to meet some of our local members of the Center for Political Innovation who I hadn't met before. Shout out to you. Shout out to the ones that I had met before. Shout out to all of you. We're doing great work here in Chicago in the lead up to our conference that'll be happening here in this city on August 6th. So it's been a great day. We were out in the streets engaging with people, on the holiday. People were in the parks in downtown Chicago. I know there were some pretty dramatic events that happened elsewhere in the Chicago area, and we'll be getting to that. But we're going to focus on the positive for now. But we had a literature table. We were passing out palm cards with information about the Center for Political Innovation. We were going out with different books, and it's been a great day of outreach. I want to thank all the people that were out there and doing hard work. And it's just the beginning. I mean, I'm going to be in Chicago for a little bit here, and we're going to be going out every day to do outreach and work. I'm going to be appearing on Hard Lens Media later in the week. So that's going to be fun. So if you're a Hard Lens Media fan, that's a local alternative media program. I'm going to be appearing on that on Thursday. So mark your calendars. If you're a fan of Hard Lens Media, I'll be on HLN on Thursday. That's going to be awesome. And today we did some great outreach, in the streets of Chicago. It was really, really awesome to be able to talk to people and real people, engage with real people about real issues. It was really, really awesome. And I actually made a short little video compilation about the street outreach we did. We basically spent the whole afternoon in the streets of Chicago until it started raining. Then we had to stop, but we were out on the streets, leafleting and talking to people. It was really, really great. So I am actually just going to show you the short video compilation, 3 minutes and 20 seconds, about the outreach that we did today on the streets of Chicago.
fun. Happy fun, guys.
It was a positive experience. A lot of people are ready to learn more about American imperialism and the way out, how we could have a prosperous United States for working people and for their families.
Yeah, it went great. We had our table with a bunch of books and the American flag. We were mainly selling the Green Book by Gaddafi and Jesus Was a Socialist, as well as I think we sold a copy of the book about oil and the global capitalist crisis.
Great. Folks are really receptive to the idea that we shouldn't be going around the world taking out these leaders who are building up their countries like Gaddafi in Libya and other leaders, and basically we should be investing this money back home to build up our country and build a better country.
Great experience. Great to talk to people in real life who are a lot more open to hearing about what we have to say instead of just angry people on Twitter who then send out their bot farms in response to whatever we're saying.
A lot of people were very receptive. The Jesus is a Socialist book was our top seller today. People were sweeping it up. There was one woman who said that she absolutely agreed, and her roommate said, yeah, she's been preaching that at me for years. There was another African-American woman who purchased it. She said that, she feels that Jesus was absolutely for the downtrodden and the oppressed.
People were overall very receptive to our message. There's one guy who came up to us and he saw the Jesus Was a Socialist book and he wanted to learn more about that because he agreed that Jesus was a socialist.
We explained July 4th by explaining that the United States has its own economic system of building up its physical economy and to break free from the free trade British system.
It's the duty of all communists and anti-imperialists to be American patriots or patriots for whatever country they might be, hail from. Legacy of America is at this point claimed by the rich, so we have to claim it back for ourselves, the American people, and fight for a government to serve the American people and not the big banks and corporations.
It's really important that we're out here on July 4th, Independence Day, to make clear that we are not enemies of the United States. What we want is a socialism that will make lives better here in the United States, make a better country through socialism and through breaking out of imperialism.
But overall, I think it's a good thing that we fought for independence from the British Empire, and people will say, oh, well, we only fought for independence to preserve slavery, but the British Empire consistently supported slavery, even through the Civil War. They tried to give aid to the Confederacy, but it was the Russians who blocked the British from aiding the Confederacy. So the Russians are our friend, not the British.
I had a Gaddafi Green Book. I was saying, have you heard about Gaddafi? Have you heard about the Gaddafi, the leader of Libya, what he did for his people? And one guy walked by and he said, a whole lot of gang shit. I just agreed,
All right. So that's just an update from the streets of Chicago. And that's really great that we are doing outreach because people need to be doing more outreach, and especially on a day like July 4th, to be out there and give a positive, optimistic, anti-imperialist, constructive socialist message. We were out there with Gaddafi's Green Book. We were out there with Jesus as a Socialist. We were out there talking about the gas prices. We sold a copy of the Oil and the Global Capitalist Crisis book. And the response we got from people was a lot of people were giving us thumbs up and saying they agreed. A lot of people were interested in what we had to say. Very little negative response. It was pretty positive. We were out there with our American flag on the literature table. We were out there with Jesus is a Socialist. We were out there with Gaddafi's Green Book, and no one was cussing us out. No one was hostile. People were interested. They didn't always agree, but they were quite sympathetic. The Jesus is a Socialist book was a great hit. And people really want to hear this. I mean, the work that the Center for Political Innovation is doing needs to be done. It absolutely needs to be done. And we saw that, right? I mean, and it's not just in Chicago that people are on the streets. It's also, in New York City. I know they're going to be out, doing literature tables in New York City pretty soon. They've been doing quite a few over the past couple months, and it's been difficult because of the Russia thing. And people are out there doing what needs to be done, and that's great. So I just wanted to congratulate my comrades and encourage more people. If you do a literature table in your city or in your neighborhood, please take at least a picture, maybe some video. We want people to see that you can go out in the streets. You can encounter total strangers in real life, not online, and confront them with a message that gets them thinking. and forces them to challenge the narratives they're being fed by the ruling class, you can do it. There's no reason you can't do it. It is possible. It's very scary when you first go out and do street outreach. I remember the first time I ever went out and did this kind of work, I was 15 years old, and I went to a communist bookstore, and I remember my mother, dropped me off. She was doing some shopping in the area, and she said, "Don't leave the store. Don't leave the store." But anyway, I was in the communist bookstore for a discussion about the Iraq War or Bush or something like that. And then in this bookstore, and thank you, David, for the super chat. Then in this bookstore, out of the blue, they pulled out some newspapers. They're like, "All right, we're going to go out and sell the paper." And I was like, whoa, hold up. You want me to go out on the streets and go up to people I don't know and talk to them about communism and try to get them to pay me actual money for a newspaper about communism? They're like, "Yeah, we do this all the time." And I was like, "You got to be kidding me." Oh my God. And I was so nervous. I walked up to people. I was so nervous, but sold one newspaper, sold another newspaper. And eventually, as I got to be, 18, 19 years old, I realized I was quite good at selling newspapers and engaging in street outreach. And one of the best things about street outreach is that it gives us access to people we wouldn't normally have access to. This is really important. All of you are here because you're part of our little corner of the internet. You're part of the little Center for Political Innovation, CPI, Haas, Hinkle, Jackson Hinkle, Jimmy Dore, Max Blumenthal. You're part of our little corner of the internet. You're part of the anti-bread tube, anti-woke left sphere. You're anti-imperialist. And that's really great that I can reach all of you. And I think you all are awesome. And I'm really glad to meet you. But the people that we confronted today are people that might never come across one of these streams, might never come across these kind of arguments. And that's why it's important that we get out of the movement into the masses, right? That we have a message that points to something very unique. It points to a unique understanding of American imperialism and how it operates. But we need to get to people who wouldn't go looking for us. We need to get access to people who would not go looking for this kind of message, people who would not investigate this kind of thing. And I'm really excited about all the people who got books today, all the people who got palm cards and learned about our organization. We're planning all kinds of outreach here in the city of Chicago in the lead up to our conference, right? And we got people coming in from out of town. We're going to do a whole campaign to build the Center for Political Innovation in Chicago. And that's going to be awesome. It's going to be very, very awesome and excited. And I want to encourage you, if you need help doing this, you want us to, figure out how to ship you some books or some palm cards so that you can help build our organization and build us out on the street and meet people and confront them with reality. Because that's what you're doing. That's really what you're doing when you go out on the streets, is we're encouraging people to think. We are encouraging people to think, right? Most people, they walk around all day with one of these vulgar, awful devices that we all have to have. And they walk around with them and they're hypnotized. And they're hypnotized and they see what the algorithms have programmed them to see. And they see what Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, what they want them to see. And they're hypnotized and they're told only one thing. And the news feed is specifically engineered toward them. And they're only seeing, what they're programmed to see. Their emotions are being played on. They're being manipulated to buy more products, manipulated to feel more negative about themselves, to have their self-esteem torn down, to think they're not good enough. That's what's going on, right? This is a mind control device. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have one. I certainly have one and I need one for the work that I do. But this is a mind control device. This is a hypnotic mind control device. And it breeds depression. It breeds loneliness. It breeds hopelessness. It breeds negativity. It breeds shallow emotional thinking. This is not your friend. While it's a necessary evil, it is not your friend. And it's a negative device. And that's where most of the people are getting their politics, right? If they think anything about politics or global events or news, it's coming out of one of these things, right? It's being channeled through the Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg filter. And it's something that's designed to hypnotize them and get them more asleep and more more depressed, more lonely, more socially isolated. Twitter is encouraging them to fight with other people, more afraid, right? And people are so nasty on the internet. You know, people don't want to go to rallies anymore. People don't want to go to political events because there's been ugly things that have been said on the internet that would never be said in person. Somebody you might actually like in person is a person you meet on the internet and you're screaming at each other because you're on the opposite sides of one of these contentious social issues. And, you know, politics channeled through these devices. While, you know, yes, we're using them right now. You might be watching me on one of these right now, and that's fine. It might be a necessary evil, right? A lot of people have guns. They don't like guns. They feel like guns are necessary for self-defense. You know, a lot of people drive cars, even though they think cars are polluting the environment. They got to have a car to get to work. I'm not saying you should boycott your phone. You might need one, but it's still not good for your brain. It's not good for your brain. It's not telling you the truth about the world. It's giving you a filtered, carefully, specifically crafted, algorithmic interpretation of events. It's not making, you know, your mental health better. It's making you hate yourself, making you feel more isolated, making you feel more afraid. And when we go out in the streets and engage with people, we walk up to people in real life, in the flesh, and say, hey, Jesus was a socialist. Do you agree? Do you disagree? When we walk up to people in the flesh and say to people, hey, you know, why can't we have public ownership of our oil and gas? Why do big corporations have to get rich off of our natural resources? That's doing the opposite. It's waking people up. It's awakening people from their hypnotic slumber, right? You know, it's the arise, ye workers, from your slumber, right? That's the opening of the Internationale, the British version of the Internationale. That's what we're doing. We're waking people up and we're confronting them with questions. That's what our whole 4-point plan in the Center for Political Innovation is. It's a question, right? We're saying, why can't we do this? Isn't this a good idea? Shouldn't we have public control of our natural resources? Shouldn't we have a mobilization to rebuild America, all the crumbling highways and bridges and roads? Shouldn't we have high-speed railway? You know, shouldn't the banking system be working in the interest of the country overall? You know, shouldn't we have an economic bill of rights? It's all designed to make you think. We're not telling you, we're not giving you everything. We're not saying to you, the problem is capitalism, socialism, class struggle, dialectics, historical materialism. You have to make people figure it out for themselves. You have to let them do their own thinking. If you hear any banging, there's fireworks going off. It happens to be the July 4th, in case you forgot. There's fireworks going off here in the neighborhood. But that's what we're doing when we go out and engage with people, is we're forcing them to think. And by us walking up to people, we're confronting them in a way that's not coming through the iPhone filter, right? We're actually going to them with real politics. We're making a real connection as real human beings, not bots, not trolls, not some angry person on the other end of a social media platform. And we're trying to awaken them. And there's something really, really special about street outreach, because it's very, very different to engage with people on the street, to be able to, you know, answer people's questions, to look at someone in the face and say, well, we think it's this way. What do you think? And there's an art to it, right? You have to learn how to do it. You can't just talk at people. People don't want to be talked at. You have to learn to ask people questions and hear their response and then give your response. You have to understand different kind of approaches people might have. It's really good for people to do outreach, not just because you get your message out to people on the street, but also because you hear what people say back, right? You hear the response of what people are saying, what's on the minds of the masses. Mao Zedong, in the Little Red Book, he talks about from the masses to the masses, the mass line, the revolutionaries are the fish and the masses are the water. And that's why I want to encourage everyone who can, to try and figure out how to do street outreach, how to promote socialism and engage in street outreach, because we did it today and you can do it. You can absolutely do it, and you should learn to do it. You should learn to do it. So I just wanted to give my little shout out there. We showed the video of that, but I want to get to another thing that's very important, which is, while we were in downtown Chicago near the Bean, near that giant silver bean, and what's it called, Mainland Park or something like that. While we were doing that, there was a shooting that happened in Highland Park. Now, Highland Park is a suburb of Chicago. Highland Park. And there was a 4th of July parade going on. There was a kids marching band going by. Somebody opened fire. 6 people were killed. 25 people were injured and wounded. Horrendous event. 6 people dead, 25 injured. What kind of country is this where we can't even enjoy a nice parade on the 4th of July without somebody shooting and opening fire and, people running for their lives? There's clips that have surfaced of where people were filming with their phones when the shooting started, and they're running, and the kids in the marching band are running. It's horrendous. It's utterly horrendous. It's utterly horrendous. And, don't tell me that the only issue is guns. Don't tell me the only issue is mental health. That it's just the individual's mental health. We have a big problem in the United States of America, this mass shooting problem. And over and over and over again, this happens. To the point we look at the TV and we see, only 6 people killed. That's no big deal. Well, it is a big deal. It's a big deal to all 6 of those people's families. It's a big deal to all 25 of those people who got injured, some of whom are probably going to be missing legs and arms for the rest of their lives. It's a big deal to all the people that are traumatized, running for their lives while they heard explosions. It's a big deal, folks. We have a problem in the United States. We have a really big problem with these mass shootings. And, we can have a hysterical conversation about guns, and that helps the Democrats. We can say the problem is a lack of religion and good morals, and that helps the Republicans. But nobody's really getting to the issue, which is that there is a fundamental societal problem. There's a fundamental societal problem. And, in the book, We Are City Builders, I have an essay where I talk about the Atlanticist pathology. The Atlanticist pathology. And a lot of people don't quite get what I'm saying there when I talk about the Atlanticist pathology. But as capitalism moved into its monopoly stage of imperialism, you started to see a society-wide breakdown of mental health and an explosion of psychopathy, an explosion of cruelty and indifference of human beings towards others. The transition from industrial capitalism to imperialism, or the dominance of finance capital on the global stage, represented a pretty big cultural shift. Now, I often quote Cecil Rhodes. I don't know if folks know who Cecil Rhodes was, but before Zimbabwe won its independence, it was called Rhodesia. I don't know if people know that. Rhodesia was the name of the country that is now Zimbabwe. And Rhodesia was a settler state, but the guy who started Rhodesia was Cecil Rhodes. He was a very prominent British colonizer and imperialist. And in addition to Cecil Rhodes, starting Rhodesia, having Rhodesia named after him, he had the Rhodes Scholar Program. You ever heard of the Rhodes Scholar Program? That comes from Cecil Rhodes, right? Rhodes was one of the biggest British imperialists and colonizers. And when he died, his estate left lots of money for the creation of what he called a secret society to promote the ideals of the British Empire. And eventually it was the money that was used. It didn't fund some, hokey secret society with passwords and decoder rings. It founded something called the Round Table Group that was set up by Lord Milner. That was one of the first imperialist think tanks. And that eventually gave birth to the New York Council on Foreign Relations. And the Council on Foreign Relations, which is the main U.S. foreign policy think tank, that they call it the CIA's brain. This is the successor, very much so, to Cecil Rhodes and his estate and the Round Table Group he created. So Cecil Rhodes, the founder of the Rhodes Scholar Program, the founder of the settler colonial state of Rhodesia, the colonizer, the imperialist, he very much is a very pivotal figure. And if you read what he had to say, he very much kind of, described a change in the mindset. That Lenin quotes Cecil Rhodes in his book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. Lenin quotes Cecil Rhodes. And Cecil Rhodes in 1895, he talked about how he was in the East End of London, a working class quarter. And he went to a protest by the unemployed. And he listened to their wild speeches that were just a cry for bread, bread, bread. And as he walked home, he pondered the importance of imperialism, because he said that, imperialism was a way to stabilize their system, and that if you want to avoid a civil war, if you want to avoid class war in Britain, you've got to become imperialist. That's Cecil Rhodes. That was 1895, he said that. But 7 years earlier, in the very working class quarter that Cecil Rhodes was in when he made that observation that if we must avoid a civil war, we must become imperialists. It was in 1888 in Whitechapel, the Whitechapel district of London, on the East End of London, the working class quarter, that you had the world's first serial killer. Now, people hear about that and they say the world's first serial killer. Well, of course, what about Vlad the Impaler? Wasn't he a serial killer? Not in the same way. No, he wasn't. Well, what about, they say, what about, Ivan the Terrible? Wasn't he a serial killer? No, he was an authoritarian strongman in Russia. He wasn't a serial killer. But the serial killer, right? The Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, that kind of thing had never happened before in the world. But in 1888, when British capitalism, British industrial capitalism, was transitioning toward imperialism and the dominance of finance capital, the control of the trade routes, and the holding back of economic development in order to maintain a monopoly by Western corporations, right? When British capitalism was transitioning into the monopoly stage of imperialism, where, the British Empire goes to India and burns down all the textile looms and forces the people of India to import their cloth from British textile mills, right? People that had been weaving long before the British were. They had their own looms for thousands of years. They burn all the looms and force them to import their cloth from Britain. The individuals, you can talk about, how, the British, they went to Africa and they gunned down whole villages with primitive machine guns. Those Gatling guns, where you crank them, those machine guns that you crank. Now they're cranking the machine guns in order to gun down whole villages in Africa. You read about the crimes that the British Empire committed in Ireland and in the Philippines and in, it was the U.S. imperialists in the Philippines, but in Southeast Asia and Bangladesh, in the Caribbean against the people in Jamaica and Trinidad and other places. I mean, the British Empire was a mass murdering institution, and it committed genocide, man-made famines. In India, they created famines. They starved millions of people to death. And in China, they forced China into poverty with their opium wars, the 2 opium wars, where they seized control of China's markets. The British Empire was this murderous institution. And it was in 1888, as we saw Britain transitioning into this economic form of capitalism, this form of capitalism we call imperialism, the dominance of finance capital, holding back development, the export of capital, right? Where instead of exporting tires and exporting, books and exporting, textile and cloth, they start exporting the very corporations themselves, right? The corporations based in Britain are dominating the global market, the export of capital, the rule of the world by trusts, cartels, and syndicates, as capitalism is transitioning into imperialism, as Britain's becoming the center of a global financial empire. And Cecil Rhodes says, to avoid civil war, we must become imperialists. As Britain is transitioning into a global financial empire, and the working class of Britain is becoming stratified with an aristocracy of labor, the high-paid workers, being played against the low-paid workers, the skilled against the unskilled, the English against the Irish, they're stratifying the working class in the homeland, and capitalism is restructuring itself into its globalist monopoly stage, the Atlanticist system, where bankers control trade routes and hold back economic development. As capitalism is transitioning into imperialism, you have in the center of the empire, you have the development of the world's first serial killer. In Whitechapel in London, you have Jack the Ripper. And still to this day, people aren't exactly sure who Jack the Ripper is. It's not really sure. Now, a lot of the police files have been released, and it seems to indicate that he was a member possibly of the British royal family. But he was somebody very wealthy in Britain. He was probably someone with a medical degree. And no one really knows who he was, right? But, he was someone very powerful and wealthy in Britain. He would go to the East End of London, into the Whitechapel district, and he would hire prostitutes, sex workers, prostitutes. He would hire them, and he would then cut them up into pieces, then mutilate their bodies. And he was not doing this because he was angry. He was doing this out of for his own kicks. For some reason, he found this to be sexually appealing, cutting women up. It was a brutal, horrendous hate crimes. I mean, I'm not going to get into the specifics on here because we're on YouTube, right? You don't want to get too graphic here. We don't want to get this shut down, but I was doing really horrendous stuff. And people were just horrified by these sexual crimes that were being committed. This guy would hire prostitutes and, he'd take them into a room or a rented room, and he would take them upstairs and cut them into pieces, basically, mutilate their bodies. They'd find, these women spread out all over the walls, and it was just awful what he was doing. I mean, he was just a vicious murderer. And he was somehow getting a sexual thrill out of this, right? And he seemed to really know human anatomy pretty well because he was probably a doctor. He seemed to know exactly where to cut, and it was really gross. So this horrendous crime is going on, and in London, the whole world is reading about it. In America, people are reading about this. In France, and Germany, and all over the world, people are like, "What in the world is going on in Whitechapel in London? This is like the most bizarre thing. This has never happened before." Never in the history of the world has someone acted this way, right? People have done bad things. You've had murderers before. You've had evil people committing crimes. But this kind of behavior, this kind of insanity has never been seen before. And the whole world is looking at it, and going, what in the world is happening? Like, how in the world is this happening? So then, the London Times, the main newspaper, starts offering a reward. Anyone who can help us find this mysterious, they nickname him Jack the Ripper. Anyone who can find Jack the Ripper, help us find him, we'll give you a reward. And they're saying, we're taking anonymous letters, from anyone who will help us find him. So thousands of letters start pouring in to the London Times. Thousands of letters start arriving to the newspaper, the London Times. Thousands and thousands of them start pouring in. Hundreds of letters a day pouring in. And they're from people in London who are claiming falsely that they are Jack the Ripper. And it's the most bizarre thing, right? And they don't have fingerprinting technology yet, so they can't fingerprint these letters. But thousands of people are sending these letters in, claiming that they are Jack the Ripper, describing the murders in like titillated language. And it's clear that while Jack the Ripper himself is doing these horrendous things, he's the guy who actually does it, right? He's the brutal, sadistic, perverted, evil murderer who's actually committing these horrendous crimes. There are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people in Britain who on some level wish they were Jack the Ripper, are having sexual fantasies about doing these deranged, evil things, right? And there's thousands of people that are writing these are basically like letters to Penthouse, except they're about murdering women in horrendous ways, right? It's like, yes, I'm Jack the Ripper, and this is how I did it, and all thousands of people in the British homeland in London are sexually aroused by the kinds of things that Jack the Ripper is doing. There's like a mass episode of sexual deviation where thousands and thousands of people are having twisted, demented, cruel, murderous, sadistic fantasies. Something is wrong with British society. How are people acting this way? This isn't normal. People aren't born wanting to do the horrendous evil things that Jack the Ripper's wanting to do. So what in the world is going on? How is this happening? And the world is like perplexed. What in the world? Why are there thousands of people in London who wish they were Jack the Ripper and are turned on and sexually aroused by the evil things that Jack the Ripper is doing? And I mean, what in the world is going on? It's a strange, strange moment. And so, of course, the actual Jack the Ripper, they're printing a lot of these letters. The ones that seem a little more credible and have details, they'll print them. So the actual Jack the Ripper is sitting there, whoever he was, and he's mad. He's mad about the fact that all these people are pretending to be him. So to prove that he's the real Jack the Ripper, he sends the infamous From Hell letter. And that's why, there's like a movie From Hell, He sends the infamous From Hell letter. And the From Hell letter actually contains body parts to prove he's the real Jack the Ripper. I mean, it's one of the most horrendous cases, right? One of the most horrendous cases. And it appears, the files now indicate that Jack the Ripper may have been a member of the British royal family. We don't know that for a fact. There are various theories that he was a member of the British royal family. We don't know that for a fact, but there seems to be, I mean, it was a horrendous case. But of course, Jack the Ripper is the first one. But then over the course of the next several decades, we start seeing more and more of this, right? In the United States, there's a guy, I forget what his name was, and he like kidnaps a little girl and eats her. He's a cannibal in like the 1920s. And we start, and especially starting in the 50s, the 1950s and 60s, all over the world, they're having this kind of evil. This kind of evil has never been seen before. What in the world is this? Why are people acting this way? In the 1970s, people think that pornography is responsible. A lot of feminists say it's porn, and a lot of Christian conservatives also say it's pornography. And I think one of these serial killers blames it on pornography. He gives lots of interviews to evangelical Christians and says, porn made me do it. And a lot of people think it's pornography. And then there's other people that say, well, this is misogyny. This is misogyny. This is men who secretly hate women. And there's other people that are saying this is the decline of Christianity and moral values. And everyone is just shocked about, why is this happening? And the Soviet Union doesn't have this problem until the very end, in the 1980s, as they're liberalizing, as the Soviet Union is falling. Then they finally have one of these perverts in the Soviet Union who's committing a horrendous crime. And the Soviet Union is horrified. They're like, what? Well, how does this happen? And if you read Soviet media, they're saying this is the West. This is coming from American media. This is rock and roll. This is Western media, Western decadence that caused this. And in Soviet media, they're saying this is a side effect of the Westernization of our society. And everyone is just like, where in the hell is this coming from? And throughout the 1990s, there continue to be cases like this. But then around late 90s, it starts to decline. And we just don't see this anymore. And it very rarely happens now. It's funny. They talk about how there's rarely any good news in the media. This kind of evil is actually very significantly on the decline. It's very rare now. What was very common in the 70s and 80s, serial killers, doesn't happen very much anymore. It's on the decline. And we are not sure why, but for some reason, we don't have serial killers anymore, right? We do. I mean, very rarely you'll have one, but it's extremely rare to have serial killers, right? And there's different theories about why. People say, well, it's because when they're young, when the serial killer is a teenager and he's torturing little animals and he's acting weird, his family sees it and they put him on psych meds and he doesn't do it. Some people say that it's Viagra, right? These guys they want to murder women because they have erectile dysfunction, right? And so now they get Viagra and they have erectile dysfunction and they don't hate women and they don't have to act this way. That's a pretty off the wall theory, pretty Freudian, but it's, all these men have erectile dysfunction. Other people say that, well, the issue is that, pornography is so accessible and that these guys just watch violent porn and now they don't do it because they watch violent porn. And some people say that it's just that our culture has changed in some ways and that, we don't know why it stopped, but no one notices that this has stopped. And the reason they don't notice it stopped is because now these evil sexual pervert, women murdering dudes, these evil misogynist sexual pervert sadist, murderers have been replaced by mass shooters, right? And these mass shooters are a completely different breed, but they kill way more people. These mass shooters, they kill a lot more people. Right? These perverts that are luring a woman someplace, they can cut them into pieces. They might kill 5 or 6 women. They might be at it for years and kill 15. But these mass shooters, right? They go to college campuses. They go to their schools. They go to different places and they just open up and they just open fire and they kill lots of people. And why? Why do they do it? Right? Now, they're not sexually aroused by it. Those guys aren't getting turned on like the serial killers are. It's not a sexual thing. It has a lot to do with anger. It has a lot to do with, they talk about, young white men and young white men and their rage, but we do have this ongoing problem. I mean, you look at Sandy Hook, the horrendous shooting that happened, the Columbine massacre of 1999. That was a big deal. I remember that. I was a kid and in the Columbine massacre of 1999. And one of the things I always tell people, and it's always worth pointing out, is that Columbine massacre of 1999, everything we were told about it in mainstream media turned out to be a lie, right? Everything, like everything that we learned about it. I remember we learned that the guys were part of a gang at their high school called the Trenchcoat Mafia. False. We learned that they were fans of Marilyn Manson, the goth rock and roll musician. That was false. They weren't fans of Marilyn Manson. We learned that they were bullied. That was a really common narrative. These kids were bullied and they just couldn't take it anymore. So that's not true, actually. They were not bullied. There is not any evidence they were bullied. In fact, one of the shooters was himself a bully. So that's not true, right? So everything we were told about that massacre at Columbine High School turned out to be malarkey, turned out to be bullshit. And one thing they didn't talk about was the fact that one of the Columbine shooters, his father was heavily involved with the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. military. And that the guy who shot up the Joker movie, right? The other murderer who shot up the Joker movie, his father was also heavily involved. In this area in Colorado is very heavily influenced by the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. military. There's a big U.S. Air Force base there, and there's all kinds of military research, and people are wondering if there's something going on there that perhaps brings out this kind of pathology. They talk about how these guys, that run the drones. It's almost like playing a video game when they murder people, right? And and that they, it's like they have it on the screen there, and they're controlling the drone, and it's almost like a video game, right? And that if you get people to the mindset where they kill people and it's like a video game, maybe they might be capable of actually killing people in everyday life as well. And people have different theories about this. But now these mass shooters, this is the new pathology, right? Just like the era of British imperialism and the ascendancy of imperialism, Victorian England, the Anglo Atlanticist order gave birth to serial killing. It is capitalism in decay and the collapse, accumulation through destruction, the decaying open international system of American capitalism that has brought us the horrendous reality of mass shooters, right? That no society in history has seen anything like this before. This is a uniquely American pathology. And people want to just say, oh, it's because they have guns. No, we've had guns here. We've had guns here for years, right? We've had guns, that years ago. Nowadays in New York City, you can't even have a gun, right? You can't even have a hunting rifle in New York City without a permit. And that permit is like impossible to get. But, years ago in the 1950s, there were people who they had gun clubs at their high school, and they would bring their gun on the subway to school so that after school they could go and shoot it as part of their high school gun club. I mean, the guns used to be much more common in America. And in some parts of the country they are, right? You go to Texas, people are open carrying all the time, conceal and carry. But, we've had guns here in the United States for a long time. So access to guns, certainly, if guns were not as easily accessible, it would be much harder for these guys to do it. But that said, that isn't the thing that makes them do it. It's not simply the accessibility of guns. Then people say, well, it's just a lack of Christianity, a lack of Christian morals. But no, a lot of these shootings happen in red states. A lot of these guys are from very religious families, that's not the issue, the criminality that produces these horrendous mass shootings, it seems to be quite widespread, and it's rooted in something in our culture. There's something deeply wrong, and that brings me back to something I've been referring to frequently lately, which is the fact that imperialism and the ascendancy of imperialism and capitalism in decay gave birth to the horrendous Jack the Ripper case, the very first serial killer case. That points to the fact that it really lines up with what is discussed in The Assault on Reason by George Lukács, and the analysis and shout out to my good friend out in Connecticut, or out in New Hampshire, who kind of pointed me to thinking this. I hope he's listening right now. But it points to the philosophical irrationalism that emerged from the ascendancy of imperialism, right? If you read The Assault on Reason by Lukács, Lukács is a Marxist philosopher, and you read his book, he talks about how Nazism and the crimes of the Nazis, were related to a philosophical trend that goes back to Nietzsche, right? The Nazis loved Friedrich Nietzsche. People defend Nietzsche and they say, well, Nietzsche's work was just being misquoted and used by the Nazis. Well, bullshit, right? Friedrich Nietzsche believed that imperialism was beautiful. Friedrich Nietzsche believed that Christianity was he called it, Christianity was the revolt of the weak against the strong, and that Christianity was too socialist, right? And that we needed to go back to a pre-Christian mindset like the Roman Empire, like the ancient Greeks, that worship strength and believe the strong should just rule over the weak. And he wrote about the blonde beast, He loved the fact that, when the British and when the Germans and the French were going to Africa and Asia and colonizing people, they stopped being nice. And they stopped treating people fairly, and they stopped having compassion, and they were doing all these horrendous, evil things. And he says, see, this is the master morality reasserting itself. We're returning to the might is right way. He says imperialism is saving us from that horrible Christian mindset that says that the last shall be first and the first shall be last. You read Nietzsche. Nietzsche is a really evil motherfucker. Nietzsche is a really evil dude, right? Ayn Rand was too stupid to be as evil as Nietzsche. Ayn Rand is bad. She's awful. I hate Ayn Rand. She was a sociopath. She was horrible, but Ayn Rand was too stupid to be as evil as Nietzsche was. Nietzsche was a really evil dude. And he genuinely believed that, right and wrong do not exist, that right and wrong were invented to hold back the great men and restrain them from ruling over the inferior ones. That basically he believes morality is populism. Whenever you hear Vosh or Thought Slime or ContraPoints ranting against populism, what they're ranting against is morality. That's what they're ranting against. When they say, populism is evil, populism is fascist. No, it's not. Nazism and fascism is a rebellion against populism. Populism, collectivism, popular power restrains the cruelty and selfishness of individuals. It says, no, you cannot, Jack the Ripper, you can't cut people up. I know you're stronger than the woman you're killing, but we as a society, we are going to form a popular bloc, and we're going to say, I don't care if you're a member of the royal family. I don't care if you're rich. I don't care if you feel you're strong and you want to. We, the weak, the society, the working people, we're going to come together and say, no, Jack the Ripper, you can't do that. And that's populism. And Nietzsche and ContraPoints and Vosh all hate that because they are all about the individual and that the strong must rule over the weak. And, why can't he go and just assert his individuality and assert his will? And this is the strong ruling over the weak. That's what they think, right? And when they rant against collectivism, when they rant in favor of individualism, when they rant against populism, when they want to break down all obligation of the individual to the collective, when they want to say there is no morality, there is no truth, that's what they're saying, right? And the Nazis were a rebellion, a voluntaristic rebellion against morality, right? The Holocaust. You look at the horrendous crimes that was committed in the Holocaust, right? In order to do something that evil and just start exterminating people in mass like that, you have to be in rebellion against any moral and ethical code. You have to say that my individual will, or what Friedrich Nietzsche said, my will to power overrides the ethical systems that have bound societies together since the beginning of time, right? And that's how the Nazis were able to create the horrendous crimes that they did. And that's why they loved Nietzsche. And that's why they hated Christianity, right? The Nazi party internally, they had this book written by Alfred Rosenberg, where they basically said that morality doesn't exist, that morality, that Christianity, that morality, all the moral codes were written to weaken the great and the strong. And this is a big part of, what they call philosophical irrationalism, the belief that the universe is actually chaos, right? And that order is simply temporary. It'll only give birth to chaos. That there is no right and wrong, and that morality simply, holds back the great men, the Übermenschen, and restrains them. And this is the strand. This is what is believed by the imperialist global order. This is what they believe deep down. This is what Joe Biden believes. This is what Donald Trump believes. This is what Kamala Harris believes. Stacey Abrams says that Ayn Rand's book Atlas Shrugged was her favorite book. You know, it inspired her. You know, I mean, this is what these folks believe, right? They believe that the weak should just rule over the strong, that selfishness and greed is good, the virtue of selfishness, that empathy and altruism and compassion are defects in the human spirit that restrain the greatness of innovators and great individuals. That's what these people believe, right? This is what you call philosophical irrationalism. And it ties into postmodernism. They believe there is no truth, right? They believe that you know, that any belief in an ideology that defines reality, any belief in objective truth and objective reality is totalitarian, is repressive of individuals, that there is no grand narrative for humanity, right? That's what postmodernism ultimately says, right? That Marxism is a grand narrative for all humanity. Marxism says that, you know, humanity has gone from hunter-gatherers to feudalism to capitalism, socialism, eventually communism. That, you know, that human history is defined by certain objective laws, and that, you know, dialectical and historical materialism. Well, you can't be a postmodern neo-Marxist. That's Jordan Peterson's mantra. Jordan Peterson, the postmodern neo-Marxists, you can't be a postmodern neo-Marxist, because postmodernism and Marxism are inherently contradictory to each other. Postmodernism says there is no objective truth, there is no grand narrative for humanity, and that the only good thing that you can do as a philosopher is engage in deconstruction, whereas Marxism says there is a grand narrative for humanity, and says there are objective truths and objective laws through which history is advanced forward, right? So there's a clear difference between postmodernism and Marxism. Postmodernism is philosophical irrationalism. It's what Friedrich Nietzsche believed, right? And it's this kind of mindset that you know, it really, imperialism depends on it. The only way that the imperialists can do their horrendous crimes, the only way they can engage in shock therapy economics and wreck Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union, the only way they can go to Chile and just destroy the economy and have children fainting in school because they don't have enough food, and the only way they can commit these horrendous crimes is just to repudiate all morality and say, look, you know, there is no right and wrong. The strong just rule over the weak. And you hear this every so often. You hear this from these bread tubers, right? You hear it from Destiny, right? Destiny, he's being confronted with the fact that socialist countries are always being attacked by capitalism, right? And that, you know, Venezuela, right? Well, Venezuela is building socialism, but, you know, the problems facing Venezuela are a result of all the sanctions and all the attacks on Venezuela. And he says, so what? You know, that just proves that you know, that you can't stand up. You're not the superior system, right? So you know, pointing out that capitalism is waging a war against socialism in Venezuela, in his mind, that's fine, because the fact that Venezuela has suffered as a result of that war proves they deserve it, because they're the weaker country, right? That's what Destiny Stephen Bonnell believes, right? That might makes right. And the fact that the Pentagon goes around the world destroying countries like Iraq and Libya, well, that proves the Pentagon's superior because they're able to do it. That's how these people think, right? This is philosophical irrationalism. It's very, very dangerous. It's extremely dangerous. And that's what they believe. And it's philosophical irrationalism and the blonde beast and the destruction and the attack of reason, the assault on reason, the destruction of reason. That is what gave birth to the Nazis and the horrendous crimes the Nazis committed. That's what gave birth to Jack the Ripper and the serial killers that they committed. And you can go into many examples of this, many examples. I could give you a number of different examples of how this plays out in our culture. But you're getting the point, which is that's where all of these horrendous, dehumanizing, immoral acts come from. Never before in human history would people have been able to commit the horrendous crimes they're committing. Never before in history. However, you know, it is imperialism, capitalism in decay that is giving birth to what I would call the Atlanticist pathology, this insane mindset from hell that enables people to just abandon all human solidarity. You know, and it's so funny because I talk about this. I talk about this and they say I'm anti-Semitic, right? You know, that's the argument. Whenever I bring this up, you know, they say that I'm anti-Semitic because I talk about Ayn Rand. Well, Nietzsche Friedrich Nietzsche, who's one of the main architects of this kind of mindset, was himself an anti-Semite. And it's this kind of mindset that gave birth to the greatest act of anti-Semitism in human history, the Holocaust, right? So, I mean, if you look at the religion of Judaism, the religion of Judaism is about training people not to act this way, right? The religion of Judaism, teaches about tikkun, right? And teaches about, mitzvahs and the idea that people have an obligation to be kind to others, right? So I'm not blaming this on the Jews by any means. In fact, I'm pointing out that the crimes that have been committed against the Jews have been historically committed by people who have this mindset, right? So people who try to pin that on me just don't know what the fuck they're talking about, right? They just have no idea what they're talking about. But regardless, right? This is where these horrendous crimes are coming from. But I want to talk about something else, right? Now we're reacting to this horrendous mass shooting that happened in Highland Park, and we're thinking about that, and we're talking about, the ideology of capitalism and decay and how we have to counter it. But I wanted to talk about something else because, it is pointed out, that school shootings didn't become like a thing until the 1990s. They didn't have school shootings until like the 1990s, Columbine, and then they started seeing school shootings. And the mass shooter thing really became it was the late 90s, early 2000s. We started to see the escalation of these kind of things. But there was an incident that happened in 1927. I don't know if people know about 1927, the Bath school disaster. And it gets kind of overlooked. It was a really big deal at the time that it happened in 1927, the Bath school disaster. It was in Bath Township, Michigan. There was a guy who was voted off of being the treasurer of the school board. He was a member, he was not allowed to be on the school board. He lost the election in Bath Township, Michigan. So he blew up the school. It was a bombing of a school, and 43 people were killed. 43 people were killed in the Bath school disaster, the Bath Township disaster. It was a horrendous incident. And this guy who had lost the election, and he was just bitter about it. And so he bombed the school, and he blew up the school, and he killed a bunch of school kids, and he killed himself. And, it was a horrendous incident, right? A lot of deaths happened. And people often will compare that to school shootings because it was a mass murder that did take place at the school. And this guy was a nut. He'd been planning it for a long time. And it was a really horrendous incident, But what's interesting about it was the guy who carried it out had a specific criminal mindset that this guy was what they call an injustice collector. This is interesting. And that a lot of people who become murderers, a lot of people who commit these mass shootings or become murderers, they have a certain mindset that they refer to as an injustice collector. I don't know if people have ever heard of this, as an injustice collector. But basically the idea is that there's a certain type of person that over the course of their life, they learn to just start keeping a grudge list of all the bad things that have ever happened to them. And it's like they develop a mindset where they take offense at little things, right? This happened to me and I'm mad about it. This happened to me and I'm mad about it. And they have this long list of injustices that have been perpetrated against them, right? And they kind of learn to interpret world events in a way, and not world events, but events in their life in a way where they are the victim, right? And it's like, and they were unfair to me here, and they screwed me over here, and they were unfair to me here, and they screwed me over here, and it wrecks their ability to have any relationships, right? They can't have any friendships because every time something goes wrong, they said, "Oh, he was screwing me over here." They can't learn to forgive. They're on the lookout for people perpetrating cruelty against them. And they start to just accumulate this bag of resentment. This grows with them all throughout their life. They were mean to me here. They were mean to me there. I was treated unfairly here. And they just have this long list of everywhere I've ever been, the people have been unfair to me. Everywhere I've ever been, I've been mistreated, and it eventually gets to be so massive that they have basically cut themselves off from all their friends, from all their relationships. They become isolated, and they become murderous and suicidal. And it's a very tragic thing. And that a lot of us who have been bullied in our life, or a lot of us who've maybe endured abuse at the hands of our parents, you develop a mindset where you start to just feel sorry for yourself, right? And this mindset can develop where you get in your mind that that somehow the world is out to get me, and you start interpreting things that happen that might be bad or might be unfair. You start interpreting them as the world being out to get you, or you're being victimized, or the world is just unfair to you. And that's a really dangerous mindset to get into. It's a very dangerous mindset to get into. And that's what this guy who did this horrendous crime in Bath Township, in Bath, the Bath school disaster of 1927, that's who he was. He was somebody who his whole life he just had been collecting injustices, right? He had cultivated a mindset where he was just being victimized by the world. He was interpreting all the events in his life as the world being out to get him. And that's a very dangerous mindset. You don't want to develop that kind of mindset. And that's the problem, I think, with social media, is that it isolates people from each other. And that what I see on social media when people are fighting with each other, right? I've seen people fighting around the abortion issue, seen people fighting around different issues, is what I see people on the internet screaming at each other is, you don't understand my pain. And then someone shoots back, no, you don't understand my pain. The other person shoots back, no, you don't understand my pain. And that it kind of feeds into this mindset where you start to kind of withdraw from the world and interpret everything in a way of as if, you are just being targeted by the world. And that's a really dangerous mindset to get into. And the reality is that a lot of bad things can happen in a person's life. And a lot of injustices can be perpetrated against a person in its life, but it's not specific to them. And that when people get into that mindset where the world is just a big conspiracy against them, right? That is a really dangerous place to go psychologically. And that's what led to that horrendous school disaster. And that a lot of these mass shooters, they do get into that mindset, right? The world has just been unfair to them. No one understands what they've been through. The world is out to get them. And that is the mindset they get into. And a lot of young men in particular get into that mindset. A lot of young men, that's the mindset they get into, is that I'm a victim. The world is unfair to me. And they just continue to be slighted, and they continue to be slighted, and they continue to be slighted, and they continue to be slighted. And they get into this mindset where they just, they finally crack. And the reality is that the part of this, I think, is rooted in some of the ultra politeness that we have in America. Now, we certainly don't have this in New York City, right? In New York City, people are rude as hell, right? On the streets of New York City, get out of my way, asshole. People just are completely, upfront with their emotions. But especially in middle America, people have, people have this mindset of like, you never say when you're angry, right? You never say when you're upset, right? Great example is that, in offices, right? Some people like it to be warmer than others. Some people want the air conditioner turned up higher than others. And that there's a certain type of person that will be cold, will be too cold or too hot in the office, but they will never get up and say, hey, can we turn the heat up or can we turn the heat down? Never. They'll never do it. They'll never do it. Because they just think, well, everyone will be mad at me, or I can't explain. So they don't have the courage to get up and say, just turn the goddamn heat up or turn the goddamn heat down, right? They don't have the courage to say, well, I'm cold, we need to turn it down. So they'll sit there and suffer, and they'll be too cold or they'll be too hot, and they'll sit there and suffer, and they'll be hating everyone else in the office. You asshole, you turned the heat up too much. You asshole, you turned the air conditioner on too high. I'm freezing, I'm hot. They'll never say anything. And honestly, that's not fair to all the people who work there. It's not fair to them because they don't know that the person's too cold. They don't know that the person's too hot. And so you sitting there and being silent while all the other people in the room they're content. They don't have an issue, and they don't know that you're suffering. They don't know that you're suffering, and you're blaming them. You're like, you assholes, you don't care about how cold I am. Well, it's not fair. If they knew, if you said to them, hey, I'm cold, can we turn the heat down? If you said that to them and they said, screw you, we don't care about you, you'd be totally justified in being angry. But there's a certain type of person that will sit there and let it be too cold or let it be too hot and not say anything. But then in their mind, they'll develop this resentment against the other people in the office. These assholes don't care about me. And that guy walking down the hall, he looked at me funny. And I bet they planned this. I bet before I walked into this morning, they said, let's turn the heat up and make Joe mad, and they get into this mindset where they don't learn to actually address the problem because they've been kind of socialized that you don't do it, right? They've been told, you don't speak up. You don't assert yourself. You don't assert yourself. You don't assert your needs. You don't assert what you want. You don't speak up and say, look, I have an issue. And so they don't. And they get walked on, or they get in a situation that they don't like, and they just build up this resentment. And this is very dangerous, right? It's much better if the person gets up and says, you know what? I'm too hot. You know what? I'm too cold. I'm not comfortable here in the office. I'm not comfortable. And they need to overcome, and they've probably been socialized. They probably had an abusive parent. They either had an abusive parent who never let them assert their needs and would have slapped them in the face if they got up and tried to turn the thermostat down. Or they had a parent who had the same mindset and said, never speak up, never assert your needs. If you assert your needs, either the parent trained them to think that way, or the parent never allowed them to assert their needs. But they developed this mindset where it's not okay for them to get up and say, I want to turn the thermostat up, or I'm too cold, I'm too hot. And they develop this mindset that gives them anxiety about doing that, right? That's told them, don't assert your needs, be ultra polite, be submissive in your interactions. And so they have that mindset that's taught them to never assert their needs, but they have needs just like anybody else. Like anybody else, they have needs. They have needs just like anybody else, but they've been taught, they've been socialized not to assert those needs. And so the world is not going to know that they have those needs, and their needs are not going to be met, and they're going to be uncomfortable, and they're going to be awkward in social situations, and they're not going to get invited, to the party, or they're going to hold on to resentment, lingering resentment against their coworkers or their friends, and it's going to ruin their relationships. It's going to ruin their relationships, right? And that's that injustice collector, and in a lot of cases, that's the kind of person who becomes a mass shooter, because it's just, if you go through the world with the mindset that everyone's my enemy, and you never learn to actually work out and resolve problems and say, you know what, it's too hot, or you know what, it's too cold, because look, even we're talking about this office thing again, right? So imagine that there's a situation where it's too cold, half the people in the office are cold, and half the people in the office are hot. And so somebody gets up and says, it's too cold in this office. Can we turn the air conditioner down? Can we turn up, the temperature? And the boss says no, right? That would be the worst case scenario. The boss or the other people say, no, it's just fine. Shut the fuck up, you. Well, even if that happens, that's the worst response. There's probably 5 or 6 other people in that office who feel that way. And by you getting up and asserting your needs, those other people are going to say, yeah, I feel that way. And even if you don't get what you want, you're going to realize you're not alone. And you're going to have a bond. And those other people are going to say, I'm cold too. And so you're going to connect with other people, and you won't be isolated. And it's going to be healthier. You're going to be healthier at that point because you're not isolated. So even if you don't get what you want by asserting your needs, by making your feelings known, by speaking up and saying, I'm too cold or I'm too hot, you're going to realize you're not alone, that other people feel the same way, and you're going to break out of your isolation. And it's just mentally more healthy. It's mentally more healthy to assert your needs. And that's one of the problems that a lot of people don't get taught by their parents. They don't get taught how to appropriately assert their needs, right? How to just get up and say respectfully, not in an angry way, not in an attacking way, not in a hostile way, but just get up and say, I think this needs to change, right? And a lot of people don't learn that throughout their life. They're socialized to never assert their needs until finally they can't take it anymore, and they're in a rage, and they just can't take it anymore, and they're like, God damn it, and then at that point, people are going to react negatively. If you come at people with a lot of rage, they're going to react in a very negative way. They're going to, whoa, where did this come from, buddy? Hold up, and so, the ability to be not passive, right? And not bullying or rageful and aggressive, the ability to be assertive in relations and just say, well, you know what, there's a problem. And I really feel strongly this way. This is how I see it. that is not an easy thing to do. And a lot of people, especially if they've had an abusive parent or an abusive upbringing, or a parent who's also, in this kind of like submissive mode that says never assert your needs, they don't learn how to be assertive in relationships. And because of that, they end up in a situation where they have lingering resentment, that the people never know about how upset they are and how much they want to do something else. And so they just build up this resentment that prevents them from connecting to other people. Or when they finally can't take it anymore, and this is the other problem, when they finally just can't take it anymore, when they finally just can't take it and they storm in a rage and are like, you do this, then the other person is just like, whoa, this guy's a crazy nut. Where did all this rage come from? This isn't proper. And that a lot of people, I think, that have this kind of an injustice collector mindset, it comes from this. They haven't learned to just properly assert what they want and say, look, this is how I see it. I want you to turn that thermostat up. I want you to turn it down. I'm cold. They've never learned to do that. And because they haven't learned to just have a healthy interaction and say, I'm a person, and this is how I, as another person, feel. They haven't learned to do that in the proper way. They've been taught to either never assert their need, to basically never assert their needs because of an abusive authoritarian parent dynamic, or that their needs only come out in a rage-filled way. This isn't healthy. And I think that's a problem that a lot of people, and a lot of men have this in particular. I think the way men are socialized, you have this, right? A lot of men are in the military a lot more. Men are in the police force a lot more. Men, there's much more of an authoritarian interaction in the way men interact with each other. Men are on the sports teams, and that male dynamics often have a much more authoritarian kind of edge to them. And because of that, we don't develop interactions where it doesn't become a battle of wills. And that's a problem in a lot of interactions between men. If one guy calls out the other guy, it can't just be, oh, well, I think it's too hot. Oh, well, I don't. And it becomes a battle of wills. And that's dangerous, right? It becomes, I'm the bigger male. No, I'm the bigger male. And that's the problem, right? That men should be able to say, well, I'm a little too hot. And the other guy should say, oh, I'm not. But I don't know what other folks think. Maybe we can negotiate, turn it down a little bit. But in a lot of the way men are socialized, unfortunately, it just becomes a battle of wills. Who's the bigger man? No, you're a wimp. It's too cold. No, you're an abusive person. It's too hot. And this is a problem, right? That social interactions and the way you learn to interact with people, the way you learn to assert your needs and not assert your needs, that has a lot to do with how you come to see the world and how people deal with things. I'm just talking psychology here because I think it's interesting. But I think this is an important mindset. It's just these mass shootings that we see. There's just so many of them, and it's just so horrendous. So I just want to talk about that. But there's a couple other items I want to talk about, and then I'm going to end my opening remarks. So I've got one closing item that's actually a happy item. We've been talking about shootings and bombings and all kinds of negative stuff. So I got one more negative item that I want to mention just quickly. And then I've got a positive item, and then I'll end my opening remarks. And thanks for bearing with me. I'm having a great time with all of you all. You all love this. You love this. Come on. You all love this. You love this. You love it. You're here to see me. If you weren't here to see me, you'd be watching something else right now. You love this. You love this. You love it. Come on. Just admit it. You love it. You love it. I'm here. I'm having a great time. I'm riffing about guns and psychology and thermostats in offices and injustice collectors, and you love it. You do. So anyway, item number 4 I wanted to just mention quickly here is that I just wanted to mention that so this earthquake happened in Afghanistan, right? 1,000 people died in this earthquake. 1,000 people died in this earthquake. And Joe Biden is on his high horse, and he's saying, wow, America is giving Afghanistan $3.5 billion. Right? He doesn't talk that way. That's not Joe Biden. He's saying, man, we're giving Afghanistan like $3.5 billion. Like, that's good. That's good, man. Like, that's a good thing we're doing there. Like, we're giving them money. But yeah, the United States is giving Afghanistan $3.5 billion. And the White House is talking about this. Like, the USA is just so noble. Look how much they're helping those poor Afghans. They had an earthquake. And even though the government of Afghanistan is the Taliban, America, out of the goodness of its heart, is helping those poor Afghans. Well, what they're not telling you is that when the USA pulled all the troops out of Afghanistan, $9 billion of Afghan government funds was frozen in U.S. banks. The USA stole $9 billion from Afghanistan in the middle of a famine. And then there was malnutrition and people were starving. And the USA stole $9 billion from Afghanistan. So I'm sorry, the White House has no grounds with which to brag and say, oh, look how good we are. You know, we're helping those poor Afghans. It has absolutely no grounds on which to brag about doing that after they stole $9 billion. $3.5 billion is quite a bit less than $9 billion. So, and it's infuriating that this isn't being pointed out. This should be front page news, absolutely front page news, that the USA is bragging about the fact that they're giving $3.5 billion to Afghanistan in the aftermath of this horrendous earthquake, after they stole $9 billion. You know, I'm sorry, Afghanistan is one of the poorest countries in the world. Like, what a punk thing to do, to steal $9 billion from Afghanistan. Why don't they steal $9 billion from England? Why don't they steal $9 billion from France? You know, but you're going to steal $9 billion from Afghanistan? That is like such a punk ass thing to do. I'm sorry. It's like, you know, I mean, it's like a senior in high school beating up a first grader. Oh yeah, I got him. I stole the quarter. I stole a quarter of the lunch money of the first grade. I mean, it's like, give me a break. You're going to take $9 billion from Afghanistan, right? You're going to steal from the poorest country in the world that's been subject to 20 years of military occupation. The whole time the USA occupied Afghanistan, they didn't bring stability to Afghanistan. They just brought back the poppy fields and the drug cartels, and the Al-Qaeda terrorist groups got stronger. And anyway, that's a negative news item. But now I promised you all I would end my opening remarks by giving you a positive news item. A positive news item. So you ready for the positive news item that I'm going to end my opening remarks with? This is pretty neat. This is a pretty neat item that I came across. So the Global Times, which is a newspaper from China, it is a Chinese communist newspaper, the Global Times, you can check them out, globaltimes.cn. They are reporting that just today, 4th of July, the Chinese Communist Party is opening up the Red Building. You guys know what the Red Building is? Well, the Red Building is a building at Beijing University that was historically used for protests and demonstrations. It's one of the most important historic sites in the Chinese communist history. The May 4th movement against Japan and protesting Japanese goods came out of there. It's a site of many historic and revolutionary gatherings. It's called the Red Building because the bricks are red, but everyone knows it's red because it's like the communist building. It's where a lot of the protests and communist demonstrations that gave birth to the Chinese Communist Party, that's where they were organized. It's a really important building. And it's just been a historical landmark for a while. It's just been a historic landmark. But today, they reopened the Red Building as a center of communist education. Amazing. They reopened the Red Building as a center of communist education. They're going to be teaching Marxism, giving classes on Marxist-Leninist ideology and communism in the Red Building. And they had a beautiful ceremony to open up the Red Building where the kids were wearing their red scarves. Beautiful stuff, right? Look at the pictures. The Red Building is back in business. Not a historical landmark anymore. Oh no, the Red Building is now once again a functional communist educational center. And isn't it interesting that they chose to do it on the 4th of July? I think that's awesome. I think that they're sending a subtle message to the US imperialists, right? You want to mess with us? Well, we're going to open up a center of communist ideology. We're going to teach Mao Zedong thought and Marxism, Leninism, and we're going to do it on July 4th. I think that's awesome. The Red Building is back in business, folks. The Red Building is back in business. They opened up the Red Building with a beautiful ceremony on July 4th. I think that's awesome. I think it's awesome, 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 awesome. So that's great stuff, folks. Great stuff. And those are my opening remarks for tonight. Thanks for bearing with me in my long psychological rant about serial killers and all of that. Thank you for all of that. Now I'm going to do the roll call. And while I'm doing the roll call, Don D from NYC is going to send me the super chat questions. So they'll be coming through on my email. That's going to be awesome. But yeah, let's find out who's with us tonight. Roll call. Who's with us? Names and locations. You're too kind, Clyde. You're too kind. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Don D from NYC has sent me the super chats. Thank you very much. And I'm going to names and locations. So we got Phil from Miami. Woohoo. Good to talk to you, Phil. We got Ryan in Oakland, Baron in Seattle, Samuel in East Germany, Bendu from American Autopsy. I got your email. I was in the middle of doing the school in Kansas. I will get back to you. I want to go on your channel. I'd love to have you on. We will get back to you, Bendu. I am so sorry. I haven't gotten back to you yet. We got Josh Knorr from St. Louis, Missouri. We got Los Angeles, Shawnee from Los Angeles, Mohsen from Iran. Got Texas, establishment disliker in Texas. We got Detroit, Anthony, Melbourne, Lionel in Melbourne, Australia. Klaus Kinski in Germany. Very, very good. We got Oxnard in California. David from Michigan. Fantastic. Oh, thank you very much. Right. We got Chester in England. We got Zarathustra in Florida, Oxnard, California. We got Vegas, baby, Mo and Danielle in Pomona, California. Niall Fraser in Hong Kong. Back again. Missed y'all. Richard from Woodland, California. Yada Yisrael in Chicago. Shout out to you, Yada. Nathaniel from Washington. Mindanao to Midwest. Lumpia Logic. Shout out to you. Burns in Alabama. Welcome, Burns. We got Mark. We got Mark Jacques. You're joking, right? All right. Clara in Georgia. Cairo, Georgia. Suzanne from Cairo, Georgia. Very good. We got Jordan in Chicago. Melbourne. Right? We got Marta K in Poland. Very, very. Jose Gonzalez in Venezuela. Shout out to our comrades in Venezuela. Argentina. Dr. Lawrence in Argentina. We got Brad, St. Louis. Bradley Wasser, Oakland, California. Good stuff. Who else is with it? Mark in Utica, New York is with us. Welcome. So glad to have you here. Natalie in Baltimore. Shout out to you, Natalie. We love you, Natalie. We love the work that you do. You're a great member of our community. As a teacher of political workshops for a third party and also a member of CPR, could I blend the two while remaining unaffiliated? Of course you can, Indy. You can use our material. That's why we publish it. If you want to do books with our books, that would be awesome. In Sophia in Michigan. Shout out to you, Sophia. Sophia did a great job. She did the audio book of the BreadTube book. That's really been great. Dorian and Northeast LA. Happy 4th of July, says Robert from Wyatt. Cleveland, Schlesinger, Jake in NYC. Dorian from Northeast Los Angeles. Good stuff. Bob Troy from New York. Anthony in Fort Worth, Texas. Cleveland, Dustin Schlesinger. Temple City, California. Shout out to you. Onik, OYMX, great YouTube channel. He does great stuff. OYMX. He's made some great videos that we posted here on his channel. Go subscribe to OYMX. That's an amazing YouTube channel. Pirate Alex in Cleveland. Great stuff, folks. All right, folks. I am going to start answering. We got Kieran from San Diego. Thank you for the super chat. We are going to start answering super chat questions. That's what we're going to do. We're going to start answering those super chat questions. All right. So the first super chat question. Robert says the U.S. was founded on anti-UK colonialism, yet conservatives and liberals basically worship the crown. Yes, the struggle of the American Revolution, and shout out to Don D from NYC. Thanks for getting the super chats. I do appreciate it. And Mr. Chopin in Kansas. The struggle in the American Revolution. The American Revolution was about the issue of should the USA have its own domestic economy, or should it just be a trading hub in the British global financial system? And the American colonists, for a variety of reasons, wanted to have their own economy. They believed in economic growth. Now, a lot of that economic growth was slavery. A lot of that economic growth was westward expansion and attacks on indigenous people. And so we don't endorse that. But the idea that the next generation should live better than their parents, the idea that technology is good, the idea that economic growth is good, the idea that we shouldn't have an oligarchical global system, that we should instead have economic development, that the global economy shouldn't be centered around Wall Street and London, but we should be raising living standards. That's all good. So we can take some good from Alexander Hamilton, from Thomas Paine, and other figures in the American Revolution. You're right about that, Robert, and that the British global financial system, we don't like that. David sent me a thank you sticker, and I thank you, David. Tyler McConnell, great guy out there in Missouri. Tyler McConnell says, Brother Caleb, I'm off to watch fireworks, but wanted to wish you a happy 4th of July, and thank you for the hard work you are doing. You give me hope for the future. Well, thank you, Tyler, and you are awesome. And you know, Chastity is awesome, and your 2 kids are awesome, and it was really neat hearing them sing the song from Frozen. That was really funny. That was a sweet part of our gathering. Tyler brought his partner and his 2 kids, and they slept in a tent, and they had a great time. They were a great part of our retreat, and that was awesome. We were so glad to have them there. And you know, the Center for Political Innovation, we attract the best people. We really do. I mean, the community that we're building, you know, in order to do socialist education, we attract people who really believe in this stuff. You join any communist group, you're going to have a whole bunch of people that are like, they don't know why they're there. They're into woke shit. They're into what's trendy among liberals. They don't know why they're there. That's not us, right? I mean, we attract people who really believe in this stuff, who really believe in Marxism, who are able to explain Marxist historical and dialectical concepts, who believe in communism, who want to teach it to other people, who have a passion about this. We attract a special caliber of people. And I want to empower all of these people. I want all these people to be giving classes. I want all these people to be writing books. I want all these people to be out on the streets doing outreach. I want to empower you, right? You join any one of these, you know, these leftover, you know, groups from the 1960s, you know, they're going to tell you, shut down your YouTube channel. The party speaks for you. They're going to say, oh, you know, we don't want you to write books. We have important leaders in our group who write all the books. And, you know, we're not like that. I want you to be the best revolutionary you can be. I want you to find your voice, to express yourself, to write articles, to give speeches, to lead classes, to, you know, I want to empower you. I think you are the answer. And if I'm not teaching you and helping you to, you know, find the strong revolutionary within yourself and accomplish your goals, I'm failing. So, you know, I want to empower you. That's what I'm about. Next question. President Jesus, he asks, does finance capital exist in China? And if so, does it invalidate Lenin's theory of imperialism if they do not become imperialist? Well, the banking sector, there's credit that's assigned in China, but the government controls it, right? I mean, the government controls the lending of money very carefully. In fact, that's one of the main ways that the Chinese Communist Party is able to assert their control over the economy, as they control the purse strings. Look, I talk about in my book, We Are City Builders, I talk about the 2015 financial crash, and the Chinese stock market, the Shanghai stock market, crashed in 2015. And then it was back up the next week because the Chinese government made a phone call and said, basically, you can't short sell. We're banning all short selling. You know, and within a week, the Chinese economy was rolling again. Right. And that's how it went. I'm just, and I guess there's more super chats coming in. I'm just loading them here on my phone. Let me just pull them up. I think for some reason my phone is slow in loading them. We got more super chats, but yeah, in 2015, you know, there was a financial meltdown, and the Chinese government just called up all the state-owned enterprises. They outlawed any insider trading or any short selling, and they, through government will, they basically forced the economy to work better. Right. And that's what, control of the lending of money and control of the purse strings is how the Chinese Communist Party asserts control over the economy. Right. If you're going to have small businesses, if you're going to have a market sector, you're going to have lending of money. Right. You're going to have that. But the idea is that the lending of money and the purse strings should be under the control of the state. And that's how it is in China. There are private lending institutions, but they are controlled carefully by the state. The government can call them up at any point and tell them you can't lend. You can't lend to this person. You can't provide a loan. So no, it doesn't become imperialist simply because banks exist. If you have any market sector, you're going to have banks. The USSR, during the new economic policy of Vladimir Lenin during the 1920s, they had private banks, and this government was lending money to private capitalists, right? They had kulak, enrich yourself, right? There was the middle peasant, the kulaks. They said kulak, enrich yourself, and they were lending money to private banks. So these kind of things, that's not the defining feature of imperialism. Imperialism isn't defined by private banks lending money. Imperialism is defined by the export of capital and the rule of the world by a profit-centered economy dominated by finance capital. And that as industrial capital becomes subordinated to finance capital, as you have the export of capital and you have the dominance of the world by trusts, cartels, and syndicates, that's imperialism. And if you look at the relationship that China has with the countries it's trading with, it's not an imperialist relationship. They are enabling these countries' economies to grow. Imperialism is when the British shut down and destroy the domestic economies of countries in Africa and Asia, India. They burned down all the textile mills. Imperialism is NAFTA. NAFTA, right? Before NAFTA, Mexican farmers were, Mexican people in Mexico have been growing their own food for years and years and years. They've been growing their own food. And then NAFTA happened, and suddenly people who've been growing their own food, you saw all the Mexican farmers going out of business, and they have to now. Mexico imports most of its food from the United States. That's imperialism, right? Is when people stop making their own products and they start having to import their products from somewhere else. That's imperialism. Imperialism is about beating down and holding back economic development in the third world in order to ensure the domination of the world by trusts, cartels, and syndicates, huge multinational corporations based in Western countries, the export of capital. Instead of exporting products around the world, the corporations themselves are exporting. We don't export French fries, we export McDonald's, right? That's the export of capital. Instead of exporting French fries on the international markets, we export McDonald's, right? All over the world, you have McDonald's, right? This American corporation is all over the world. All over the world, you've got Coke. All over the world, you've got American tech companies. All over the world, you got iPhones, right? The export of the corporations themselves, not the products, right? The dominance of the world by corporations based in Western capitalist countries that are reaping in super profits, holding back development in countries across the planet, keeping the world poor so they can stay rich. That's imperialism, an economic order. And that's not what China is doing. In fact, when China trades with these countries, they build up the domestic economies. More businesses open in African countries because China goes in. Countries that have joined the Belt and Road have seen more businesses and more of a domestic economy flourishing, not less. Chinese investment tends to enable these countries to have a stronger economy, mainly because China builds up the infrastructure. Right? That's a big part of having an economy is you need infrastructure, right? When I was a kid, and I'll move on to the next point after this, but when I was a kid, I remember I used to be in, I used to be in church, and we would have these little boxes for UNICEF, for the United Nations, and we would go around, asking people for their spare change for quarters, and it would go to build a well in some African country, and we would feel like, oh, we're such great people, right? We're going to go help them build a well in this African country. Well, we can say that we're all great because, we raise money with our little cardboard boxes to, have wells in African countries. But the thing is, imperialism has created an economic situation in those African countries where they don't have a modern water system. They don't have a modern water system because the infrastructure that is basic to having a flourishing, prosperous economy, you need to have, if you're going to have a flourishing domestic economy, you need to have a modern water system. You need to have running water. You need to have water treatment facilities. You need to have clean drinking water. So, if a country is kept in a situation where they don't have a modern water system, are you really a nice, is your country so nice if your kids are, raising their nickels and dimes to help them have a well? Of course not. Of course not, right? That what China is doing when they go to Africa is they're building a modern water system. They're building a power plant, so these people have electricity, and they're building highways and high-speed railway trains, and they're building the infrastructure that lays the basis, for a flourishing economy. And that is how these countries are lifted out of poverty. The IMF and the World Bank, they do the opposite. They go to these countries and they demand that they cut down the public sector. And they strip these countries of infrastructure. They strip these countries of, in Venezuela, they talked about how in the 1990s, the garbage wasn't being collected because the government, the IMF and the World Bank would go to the Venezuelan government and say, all right, we're giving you development loans, but in order to get your loans, you need to lay off more public sector workers. And then the next year they'd come back, all right, to get your loan this year, you need to lay off even more public sector workers. And it got to the point they didn't have enough people to collect the garbage, right? And it got to the point the power plants weren't being repaired, right? The spark of the Bolivarian revolution in Venezuela was the Caracazo, which was a riot caused by the fact that the government funding for the public transportation system was reduced so much that the cost of riding the train doubled. And for people that are in conditions of poverty in central Caracas and impoverished neighborhoods, that was like it would cost them meals, right? You know, I mean, they were going to lose meals because the price of getting on the train went up. And so because of that, getting on a train or a bus, the price like doubled. They went out and rioted, right? Neoliberalism and the dominance of Western finance capital is about stripping down the public sector so that the domestic economy of these countries just collapses and they have to start importing all their products from the West. Great example of that is Guatemala. Guatemala is a country that's been under the domination of U.S. imperialism for decades, right? In 1953, the progressive president, Jacobo Arbenz, was overthrown in a coup backed by the CIA in the United States. And after Arbenz was toppled in Guatemala, they replaced him with a string of U.S.-backed dictators, Rios Montt and others. Right now in Guatemala, they don't actually have a public post office. They don't have a post office because the president, Jimmy Morales, sold the post office. He privatized the post office and they couldn't find the money to pay the bill. And now they don't have a functioning mail. They don't have a mail service. They don't have a post office in Guatemala. That's neoliberalism. That's free markets. That's what Western capitalism does. China does the opposite. China goes into your country, and China goes into your country and they build the post office and they build a power plant and they build a railroad, and they build a modern water system and they help you build schools and they do the opposite and they build up your economy. So that's not imperialism. Imperialism is about holding back development. And on Rockfin, Jim Garrison sent $5 tip. He says, "I want you to be the best revolutionaries." Well, thank you, Jim. We appreciate that. We do appreciate that. All right, I'm going to move on to the next super chat because the night is young, as they say. All right. What do you know about USAGM and the regulations that they have used against broadcast propaganda domestically? I don't know enough about that. I do know that, there was for a long time a law that you could not broadcast any government propaganda in the United States. There was a law against it, right? We have Voice of America, but it was illegal to broadcast Voice of America in the United States, right? And that PBS is a private corporation that's funded by the government, but it's a private corporation, so it's not technically government media. And for a long time, they had a rule that Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, none of that could ever be broadcast in the United States because they feared that would lead to a totalitarian state. And they quietly got rid of that regulation in 2014 amid the beginning of the Ukraine crisis. They got rid of that regulation. So, but that for a long time was U.S. law, was that Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, these are blatantly funded by the United States. The blatantly funded propaganda, could not be broadcast, right? You had the CIA managing private media with Operation Mockingbird. You had PBS, you had the military sponsoring films, but directly government media could not be broadcast within the United States. They got rid of that. That's been changed. They changed that law. So there you go. I think that's what you must be referring to, but I don't know for a fact. All right. I don't know what USGM is. So the Highland Park shooting, Clyde Agburn says, the Highland Park shooting strikes me as a PSYOP hoax, social media archive. Well, every time anything happens in the United States, anytime anything happens, they immediately declare it to be a hoax, an inside job. It didn't happen. These shootings happen. People die. The shootings happen. Now, what I think is interesting is I guess this guy who did it, he was a rapper. It was an aspiring rapper who did it. A white guy who was an aspiring rapper. So what in the world is going on there? But I'm not the kind of guy that sees a mass shooting and says, "Oh, it must be a hoax." I'm not that kind of guy. It's possible, right? We do know that there are instances where such things have happened in U.S. history, but I'm not sure about that for this case. And I want to be careful because if everything's an inside job, nothing's an inside job. And this is what, there was a document that was leaked by Cass Sunstein. Cass Sunstein worked in the Obama White House. He worked in the Obama White House. He's married to Samantha Power. And Cass Sunstein, he said that one of the best ways to fight, quote unquote, conspiracy theories was what he called cognitive infiltration. and immediately declaring, and filling the internet up with conspiracy theories that will discredit conspiracy theories. And I've noticed that no matter what happens in the United States, they say it's a hoax, it's an inside job, it's fake. And that way they create a light switch effect where you either believe what the mainstream media says or you're in cuckoo land where it's the lizard people and the Illuminati and everything's a hoax and all of that. And that's what they want to do. They want to create that light switch effect where you either believe them and just completely believe whatever they say, and you just are a complete sucker for whatever they say, or you're just a crazy lunatic. And no, there are a lot of lies told by our government. And around this Ukraine stuff and around, the history of the US government, they've lied, they've manipulated people, and we should be able to question things. But yes, everything's not an inside job, everything's not a hoax. And they love to create that false dichotomy where you're either a lunatic or you agree with them. Well, no, there's plenty of people who don't agree with them but aren't insane. All right, very good. All right. This person says he's reading a book. Adam M says, I'm reading a book on Biden called Laptops from Hell. Laptop from Hell. He's reading a book on Hunter Biden called Laptop from Hell. It talks about his weird lifestyle and connections with corrupt corporations overseas. I ought to read that. I didn't know that book had come out. I'm going to read Laptop from Hell. That sounds fascinating because I want to learn more about this satanic Biden family. I mean, Hunter Biden, we know what he is, with his crack habits and his, his sex addiction and his getting kicked out of the military for cocaine and his corrupt dealings in Ukraine where he's getting paid by a natural gas company, even though he doesn't know anything about natural gas. And, we know about that. And now we also know that it appears that Hunter Biden, that Joe Biden molested his daughter, right? That there's a diary that she wrote when she was in drug rehab that he was sexually molesting her. So, this Joe Biden guy is an evil dude. You want to feel sorry for him now that he's a tired old man. But, I'm sorry. I believe Tara Reade. Tara Reade is a friend of mine. I believe she's telling the truth. And that, I'm sorry, you'll look at those clips of Joe Biden, all the women he touches weirdly, the sniffing. Joe Biden's a creep. He's absolutely a creep. You know what I mean? He's a dude who thinks he can do whatever he wants. And, the apology he gave when women started coming forward was not an apology. It was almost like he was joking about it. He's like, I lift up women, I like to lift people up. I touch people. It's not funny, dude, and you'll notice Me Too started when Trump, who's a notorious pervert, Trump took office. So suddenly we had the Me Too movement. And then when Biden became the nominee, bang, it's gone because Biden, who's a notorious pervert and notorious inappropriate, sexual assault fiend, when he took office, all of a sudden, we can't talk about it anymore. I believe Tara Reade, and who else probably says she believed Tara Reade? Kamala Harris, right? Kamala Harris was asked, do you believe Joe Biden's accusers? And she said, I believe women. She's never retracted that. And I am convinced that Kamala Harris did something. She twisted Joe Biden's arm to get to be the vice president. Joe Biden, and you can read my book on Kamala Harris. I don't want to give it all away. But, I followed that very closely because I have been on to Kamala Harris. She is satanic. If there ever was an evil woman, it's Kamala Harris. And I am convinced that she did something to make sure she got to be vice because Joe Biden announced her late. 6 hours before he announced her as the vice presidential nominee, she unfollowed him. The Democratic convention schedule listed her speaking at a separate time other than the vice presidential nominee. And she's never retracted. Kamala Harris has never retracted her statement about, Joe Biden believing his accusers, believing Tara Reade and the other women who've come forward about Joe Biden. She said she believes them. She's never retracted it. And in her acceptance speech at the convention as vice president, that weird convention with no audience because of COVID and all of that, she said, and I know a predator when I see one, followed by an awkward pause. It was very strange, very, very, very strange. So I am convinced that Kamala Harris, she had something on Biden and she forced Biden to accept her. Kamala Harris fights dirty. If you know anything about Kamala Harris, she fights dirty. She fights dirty. So there you go. All right. Funky Lollipop says that I have a great sense of humor and you love it. Well, thank you, Funky. I appreciate it. I'm really glad you like my sense of humor, Funky. That's great. Frank Nakai says, please tell us about the Uzbekistan problem and who's behind it. Also, problem of mass shootings, is it uniquely an American problem? If yes, thanks a million, Silicon Valley. Well, I can't touch on the Uzbekistan stuff right now. I haven't been following that as closely as I should. I do know Uzbekistan is in Central Asia, and that the USA would like to, move Uzbekistan, further away from Russia. And they don't like the fact that Russia has a lot of business and influence in Uzbekistan. And, they don't like that. But I haven't followed the latest developments there, so I can't comment on that. But yes, the mass shooting thing, the way it's articulated is a uniquely American problem. Look, a lot of countries, you have guys with guns who shoot people. In Latin America, you got drug gangs killing each other. That's not the same thing, right? Drug gangs killing each other. In Asia, you have a problem of the father will lose his job and then he'll commit suicide, but he'll kill the wife and kids too because he thinks that's honorable or something. And that's obviously horrendous, but that's not the same thing either. That's not the same thing either. That's not the same thing either. The mass shooting thing, the 19, 20, 25-year-old male who has a psychotic break and decides he wants to go down in a blaze of glory and kill a bunch of innocent people before getting shot by the police or killing himself. That is a uniquely American phenomenon. And there you go. So whatever happened until proven guilty. Well, I just got to tell you, I don't know exactly where Austin is what he's referring to, but I'll tell you this much. Anyone who knows anything about the U.S. legal system knows innocent until proven guilty sounds really nice, but it's bullshit. It's bullshit. It is bullshit. You're never innocent until proven guilty. That sounds nice. That, oh, wow, we bend over backwards not to lock up innocent people. It's bullshit. You've never been innocent until proven guilty, right? I used to like to watch that show Third Rock from the Sun, and there was a character on Third Rock from the Sun who was like a dumb cop. And I remember one time, some guy's on trial, and he says, "Wow," he says, "I know he's guilty." And they say to the cop, "How do you know he's guilty?" He says, "Well, he's on trial, isn't he?" It's like, you're assumed guilty, right? In the U.S. legal system, nobody goes to trial. Nobody goes to trial. 99% of cases never go to trial. Over 99%. It's overwhelmingly settled out of court, plea bargains, and all of that. So if anyone goes to trial, something's wrong. It is the great exception if anyone ever goes to trial. Most people that are charged, they make some kind of plea deal, and that's that. So, it's very rare that you have a trial in the United States. And at your trial, you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. But it is extremely rare for anyone to be acquitted in the United States in court, right? Yeah, I know on Law and Order, the innocent, the bad guy gets away with it and gets acquitted on Law and Order all the time. Law and Order is fiction, folks. It's a fictional show. In New York City, we have various boroughs. The Bronx is one of the poorest. It's the poorest borough in New York City, and it has the highest acquittal rate in the country. In trials that take place in the Bronx in New York, they have the highest rate of acquittal in New York City. The highest rate of acquittal at trial is in the Bronx. And you know what it is? It's 1/3. So 2/3 of the people that go on trial in the Bronx get convicted. 2/3 get convicted. And that is the lowest conviction rate in the country. If you go to trial in federal court, forget it, right? Acquittals in federal court are rare. They never happen, right? And the reason that people always get convicted when they go to trial, the reason they always get convicted is because it's the government, right? It's the government, right? The government is the one who's going after you. The government, they have all the resources of the government. They have all the team of people. And on top of that, the way the trial is set up, the judges, a lot of them are former prosecutors, a lot of them are former police. And, you're not innocent until proven guilty. That sounds nice. Oh, within a shadow of a doubt. And there's all this rhetoric. It's all bullshit. And it pisses me off. It really pisses me off because, in other countries, everybody knows this. Almost every country in the world, pretty much. The way it works is, if you piss off the people in power, they come after you. If you do something that causes problems for the people in power, if you, commit a crime against society, or you do something that makes the people in power not like you, the government comes after you. And if they come after you, generally, you can, if you're well connected enough, you have enough money, you got enough powerful friends, you might be able to get out of it. But if not, you're screwed. That's how it is in every country in the world. I don't care what country it is, that if you piss off the people that are running the country, if you're well connected enough and you have enough money and you have powerful people you're connected to, you might be able to get away with it. But for the most part, No. For the most part, no. However, in the United States, we pretend it's not like that. In the United States, we pretend, oh, we have this amazing legal system and within a shadow of a doubt, and it's all bullshit. I'm sorry. Anyone who's ever been on trial can tell you that. I'm sorry. I sat in the courtroom in Cleveland with so many police brutality victims, and you would not believe how completely ridiculously rigged the system is. I'm sorry. If you go to trial in federal court, you go to trial in local criminal court, you're going to be convicted. I mean, the chances of you being acquitted are rare. And the scary thing about that is acquittals are so rare. And if someone goes to trial, they're probably innocent. Why would they risk going to trial if they weren't innocent? If I ever am on a jury, and I'll never get on a jury. Who would have me on a jury? If I ever get on a jury, there's no way I would ever convict anybody. Never in a million years. Maybe if it was like a really wealthy guy who was accused of rape, I might convict him because I think maybe this guy actually did it and he's wealthy and he's just trying to get out of it. But other than that, there's a very, very rare circumstances where I would ever find anyone guilty, right? Because the way the jury system is set up, it's ridiculous. So there you go. All right. I'm sorry, but it's like our legal system in the USA. It's just a formality to pretend that we don't have an autocratic system here, which we do. As long as there is division of classes in society, as long as you have to have an authoritarian state to hold society together because of the level of scarcity and instability, you're going to have a repressive system. And that's why I would never convict anyone in our American legal system. I would never do it. Mass shootings in the USA started with postal workers going postal. That was in the 80s, right? In Detroit, it was the first guy who went postal, was a postal worker in Detroit, right? And they called it going postal workers, right? I remember that. They would show up at the post office and, there were all kinds of studies done about the working environment at the post office. And it was, young men. It tended to be young men at the post office. That was a thing in the 80s, going postal, shooting their coworkers. You're right about that. Well, I apologize, folks, if this was a depressing stream. I always try to be optimistic on here. We talked about a lot of dark topics tonight, but I do believe there is hope, folks. I really do. And I'm inspired. I'm so inspired by the people that are joining the Center for Political Innovation now. We have well over 200 members at this point. We want to get 1,000 by May, and everyone who comes around is special. They are of a high caliber. They're great people in our organization. The people that join CPI, I love them. I really do. These people are so optimistic. They're so committed to what we're doing. And that's why I'm so happy about the work that I'm doing. And we can change the world. We really can change the world. Happy 4th of July, everyone. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night, folks. Have a good night.